Ramon got me, somebody had to do monetary theory and central banking and so on, so he asked me to do it. But I just don't see central banking as a hotbed of brand new ideas. You know, and I want to slide to, this is a Angus Madison's story, and it runs out too soon because Madison died. So that's going to cripple my, but I've done this a lot. And you can see the steady growth rate of the U.S. and the U.K. They're all growing at the same rate over the same, they're all, and then the other countries, France, Italy, Japan, after the Second World War, you know, just took off, and all these countries are running exactly the same thing. Now, there's a different level effect here. I think that the U.S. is kind of less, I don't know what to say, tries to do less through government relative to these other countries. But in terms of growth rates, this growth rate for the successful countries is just pretty much a steady, it's pretty much a steady rate. Now we'll go back to the, okay. Now, what theorists like to do is to plot against, you know, evidence on a short basis. I can't really read this. I can't see. What am I doing? I just look at the top two. The first thing is a.
You can stand up if you want.
I don't want Australia. Here, let's go back. I'm sorry about this. No, don't go fast because I can't keep up with you. All right, here we are in the U.S., okay? What you've got on the left panel is everything, very short-term stuff that you're taking. And then on the right-hand side, we just ruled out everything but slow-moving stuff, okay? And the right thing has easy, you can just read it and you know, see World War I, World War II, and the U.S. collapse or in the 70s and 80s. So it kind of makes sense, and you can think about it. But the left is just for the poor guy who has to write a column about every day about what's going on in these prices. I just don't think there's anything in there. At least Prescott and Kidlin kind of convinced me that there's we just shouldn't be looking at these short-term data, and we should look at the longer one. So that's my excuse for not giving Ramon's talk. So I want to talk about something else, sort of. The most interesting development in monetary policy and the Federal Reserve over my lifetime has been the steady expansion of professional economists. We're just getting more and more sophisticated, and the rest of the country is paying more and more to what they do. And I just want to talk about that, and I think it's pretty exciting. Now, what did this expansion of professional economists take off, and what are its consequences? you could say, you know, anything here. Roosevelt administration in the 30s just built up a ton of really amazingly good data that we're using. All of us are using all the time now. Still, I don't know quite how Roosevelt got into that, or maybe. But it's a blessing to all of us, and it made the people who were economists looked at real data that people in the rest of the country just didn't have. There was a sophistication there. In World War II, there was a lot of economists and, of course, other people drawn into economics, and many economists found that they enjoyed working with policy issues and politics, and many other non-economists were impressed with how economists could tell them stuff that was interesting. So it was kind of a you know, they kind of realize that it's not just having, you don't just have to have a law degree in order to be a thinker. I think that this Council of Economic Advisors that came up after the war was kind of a way of solidifying this, what had occurred during the war. So economists were doing stuff that people, not all of us, but some of us. When I was in college then, or starting at economics, and when Kennedy was elected in 1961, he all of a sudden he brought a lot of economists that were on my reading list and so on, you know, Walter Heller, Keller, Kenneth Arrow, Jim Tobin. These people were all of a sudden working or having some working in the government, and you know, all of us were ambitious young kids. We'd do anything to do it. To have a job like that, or at least with those people, or else we'd want to be invited to do it. Now, this process, what I've been describing, didn't really have that much to do with monetary theory, did it? But in the 1930s, well, first of all, Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz's picture on the book on the Federal Reserve System was in 1963, and it was Bombshell, and they kind of described how the Federal Reserve managers and stood by and let the economy drop after 1929 and stay dropped when, according to Friedman and Schwartz, it was pretty easy, and I'll talk about this later. The thing could have been addressed right away, and it just wasn't. And it wasn't because the people who were doing it didn't know anything about economics. There's a lot of crazy stuff that was going on during the 30s, but it wasn't, most of it wasn't stuff that made any sense at all. So Friedman and then Meltzer and Brunner, they all kind of got together with other people in the St. Louis Fed, and that became a good place for that's where they invented M1 and M2 and so on. Students, so you'd ask your students what's M1 and what's M2. I think it's been there since the I don't know. So anyway, these guys, the M1, M2 guys, now had models which had monetary stuff, as well as the stuff that people like well, Samuelson, Larry Klein, people were doing exciting work, but without anything having to do with monetary theory at all. So after the 60s, it became pretty standard that Federal Reserve banks had to have some really economists, and they started taking them on. But it didn't take in the governments really. You think about Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter. Their heart was in the right place, I suppose, but they just didn't know what the economics of situations were, and they didn't really have anybody, or they had them but didn't listen to them. So that whole thing blew up when Paul Volcker just took over in this long expansion, unnecessary expansion in the 70s and 80s, and just knocked it down. And they reduced the growth rate, and it's been steady as you can be. People are always worried about how, but you look at the data, it's just kind of, these guys don't know what they're doing. So Volcker and Alan Greenspan were pretty much solid citizens. And then came Bernanke and Janet Yellen. Now these two were established, distinguished economists before they did anything for the central bank or anything. They were writing papers and having an influence of you know, what I call real economists, although I know it's a bit of a snob. And then it was Bernanke was on duty when Lehman Brothers crashed. There's only been one big crash in the United States, and that was the 30s. But now it looked like, and Bernanke had to do something to do about it. And what he did, and I just think this is so remarkable. He doesn't think it is, but Lehman Brothers failed in September 15th, 2008, and at that point there was $40 billion in reserves at the bank, and Bernanke just kept pouring in money. It took a lot of nerve, but he got into from 40 billion, he got up to 800 billion by Christmas, by New Year's Day. So this is, and he just kept doing it, and it worked, just like Friedman said it would work, and it was like what Ben always said it would work, and then he just did it. And I don't know quite how he must. I mean, he obviously had a talk. I don't know what the inside of it all was, but so by the time Barack Obama started, there was no crisis anymore. There was no downturn, no crash. Now people talk about the crash, but it's nothing. I mean, I think maybe Obama went overboard in bailing out people who lost their jobs, but you know, there's a point to bailing out people who lose their jobs. So it's something reasonable people can argue about, but it maintained for quite a long time. So I think we ought to take some pride in here are these guys, Yellen and Bernanke, and there are plenty of others too. They have different vote on different sides of the fence, but they somehow work together and get stuff done. That's helpful. So I think we ought to be proud of us, or at least Bernanke and Yellen and many other people who are really actively working on it. But it's we're really. I hope it lasts, because I think it's just it's been very good for it's not everything. I mean, Ann has already talked about, but this is just as simple. This monetary stuff is just to keep the money growing at a reasonable rate. Doesn't have to be, +2, +3, +2. Okay, but 45, no. That's wrecking your country. And the second thing is, when crashes come, and they will crash, because that's what we learned from well, all I'm saying is, what am I saying? So what I want to do is keep the money supply growing at a reasonable rate. Don't worry about day-to-day, up-down stuff. And when some crash occurs, do something, and we know now what to do. And that's about it. I know nothing. I mean, I've never done anything at all like this. Never. But guys will talk about people you admire.